بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واجعلنا من خيرة أمة سيدنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. قال الإمام حجة الإسلام أبو حامد الغزالي قدس الله سره ونفعنا الله به وبكم آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي يفتتح بحمده كل رسالة ومقال، والصلاة على محمد المصطفى صاحب النبوة والرسالة وعلى آله وأصحابه الهادين من الضلالة. الحمد لله الذي يفتتح بحمده كل رسالة ومقالة، والصلاة على محمد المصطفى صاحب النبوة والرسالة وعلى آله وأصحابه الهادين من الضلالة. أما بعد، فقد سألتني أيها الأخ في الدين أن أبث إليك غاية العلوم وأسرارها وغوائل المذاهب وأغوارها، وأحكي لك ما قاسيته في استخلاص الحق من بين الاضطراب الفرق مع تباين المسالك والطرق، وما استجرت عليه من الارتفاع عن الحضيض التقليد إلى يفاع الابتصار، وما استفدته أولا من علم الكلام، وما اجتويته ثانيا من طرق أهل التأليم القاصدين لدرك الحق على التقليد الإمام، وما ازدريته ثالثا من طرق التفلسف، وما ارتديته آخرا من طريقة التصوف، ومن جلى لي في تضاعيف تفتيشي عن أقاويل الخلق من لب الحق، وما صرفني عن نشر العلم ببغداد مع كثرة الطلبة، وما دعاني إلى معاودته بالنيسابور بعد طول المدة، فابتدرت لإجابتك إلى مطلبك بعد الوقوف على صدق رغبتي، وقلت مستعينا بالله ومتوكلا عليه ومستوفقا منه وملتجئا إليه. اعلم. Welcome to the class. This week, inshallah, we're going to start with a review of Ghazali, what's called Ghazali's autobiography, the Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the deliverance from error. This is a work that he wrote near the end of his life, probably in his final retirement in Tus, after all of his long struggles, and clearly at the request of one of his students. It is a story of his intellectual travails, his intellectual journey, his own account of of what he did in his life in searching for the truth, what he investigated, why he did it, what motivated him. And it is a startling insight into the life of the great Imam. He is, in this account, as you'll see as we go through it, incredibly honest about himself, about his reasons and his experiences. It is also a pretty magisterial summary of claimants to truth. Okay, it is his critique, it is his, I suppose, his great work of epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy, a branch of learning, and it is the study of knowledge. What constitutes true knowledge? What constitutes truth. How can you know it? How do you determine it? What are its criteria? And what is the status, the epistemological status of the knowledge of those who claim to hold the truth? Okay? So it's useful from two perspectives. What you'll find, especially when we look through his critique of philosophy, he's a very summarized critique of philosophy. You'll find in that a lot of lessons for us, actually, on how we deal, with some of the questions that sometimes arise. Okay. So I'll read. As I mentioned before, probably the best translation is McCarthy's translation. This you can get it like this. You can also, I think, Who Books has just Deliverance from Error. They've just got McCarthy's translation of Deliverance from Error, which is probably cheaper than this. But I'll read his introduction. I've read the Arabic. And interestingly, the translation has something that my Arabic is. The text that I have, it's a PDF. It's really, really small writing, so it's really difficult to read. But it's the only one I could get, so there we are. But the English translation actually has. He starts off with a statement: "Atawakkalu ala al-hayy la yamut." I trust in the living, who will not die, or who does not die. I trust in the ever living, al-hayy la yamut. Who will not die. Now, in regards to the munqidh, there are a number of opinions that are given about the munqidh in terms of what is it. Now, we need to understand here that the classical civilization of Islam was crazy about biographies. I mean, there are all sorts of biographies. I mentioned this probably before, but there are all sorts of biographies that were written from very early periods. So, Bukhari, for example, At-Tarikh Al-Kabir, we mentioned, I think, last week. His great work of biographies of 40,000 narrators of hadith that he had encountered in his times, his travels, along with, an attempt to grade the narrators as well, in terms of whether they were reliable or unreliable. It started off like that, but it did become a craze, and there were biographies about lots of different things, great benefactors in Islam, and obviously the kings and the rulers, biographies of rebels, biographies of famous highway robbers, all sorts of things. But what is astonishing, given that, is that you don't find autobiographies. Very few people, or certainly very few accounts survive of people writing about their own lives. All right? The closest that we have are what are sometimes called the Sufi diaries. Okay? The Sufi diaries, which are really the accounts some Sufis wrote of their mystical experiences. Yeah? And their reactions or their understanding of those experiences. So you have Ruzbihan Balkhi, for example, was a great Persian Sufi, early Persian Sufi, and he wrote an autobiography that I think has actually been translated into English. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq wrote an autobiography as well, an account of his spiritual strivings and so forth. But these aren't autobiographies in the sense that we understand them. Yeah, I was born in such and such a place. It's not about me. It's about what I experienced and what you can learn. So if you like, it's a didactic autobiography. Okay, a didactic autobiography. Learn some lessons from my life, basically. Yeah, and it's a very powerful way of instructing. Okay, is the Munqidh an autobiography? Ghazali doesn't really talk about his family. He doesn't talk about anything about his personal life. It isn't really an autobiography. It's sometimes referred to as one. It isn't an autobiography. The Munqidh is a very personal account of Ghazali's epistemological quest, his searching for the truth. What he does is, rather than simply write a pretty dry overview of, here are the people who claim knowledge, here's what I think about the first people, here's what I think about the second group of people, etc., etc. What he's done is he's woven into it, he's woven these things into the fabric of his life, because they were very connected to his life. And some of the most powerful sections of the Munqidh are actually where Ghazali is talking about his inner striving, the struggles that he had. Okay? We're going to encounter one this week, because we're going to split the Munqidh over 2 weeks. We're going to encounter one of those this week, which is what you might call his crisis of skepticism. Okay? And we'll counter another one next week, which is his very famous spiritual crisis. So we've heard about the second one. We know that there was this period where, you know, he started reading the works of the Sufis, and he was kind of dithering as to whether to, you know, to stay in Baghdad or leave. And then he was overcome by this illness, and he couldn't speak. And he said, Allah sort of, Allah created a way for him. You know, Al-Farisi said, you know, his life was overturned from an altogether unexpected direction, and he went off and he became a mystic. And we've seen it from the outside. What happened on the inside? And one of the reasons this is fascinating, we'll do it inshallah next week, but one of the reasons it's fascinating is actually because we hear about these great spiritual conversions. They call them conversions, inqilab, an overturning of someone's life. Okay, Ibrahim Adham was from a noble family in Balkh, for example. Ibrahim Adham, one of the great early Sufis, Ibrahim ibn Adham, one of the great early Sufis. Okay, way earlier than Ghazali. One of the types of people that Ghazali refers to, actually, Ibrahim ibn Adham. He was a prince of Balkh. Okay, he lived his life surrounded by luxury. All right, as princes do. Okay, and there are a number of accounts of this. One account says that he was sleeping one day, and he heard someone walking on the roof. So he comes out and he says, "Who is that?" And he says, "Oh, my name is so and so." He said, "What are you doing on my roof?" He says, "I'm looking for my camel." And Prince Ibrahim says to him, "You idiot! How do you think you're going to find a camel on a roof?" And that man says to him, "Woe to you! Who's the fool? Do you think you can find God resting on silken cushions? Yeah, you think I'm an idiot to think I'm going to find a camel on a roof? You're the greater idiot. You think you're going to find God in the middle of all this luxury. You're going to find God." And Ibrahim left the house. He left his home. He left his wealth behind him. He became a mendicant, wandering Sufi, and he became this great figure in Tasawwuf. And there are many stories like this. I mean, the story of Ibrahim Adham is particularly interesting because it's very similar to the story of Buddha, actually. Exactly the same thing. Buddha was a great Siddhartha Buddha, great prince, noble family, this, that, and the other, shielded from the horrors of the outside world, and eventually realized that he couldn't square his life with what was happening outside, and he also deserted it. He left everything and he went off to seek enlightenment. So we hear about these, but we don't often hear first-hand accounts, i.e., or if what I said to you last week was zero-hand accounts, personal accounts of what that person actually went through. With Ghazali, you find that personal account, and you find some of that struggle. So we don't know whether Ibrahim Adham, after that point, there is this notion that he just kind of disappeared off into the wilderness. We don't know whether he sat and kind of scratched his head for 6 months. Should I, shouldn't I? I'm not sure. Actually, it's really comfortable here. Do I really want to? Did he go and then come back again? We don't know. Okay, and so this is part of the humanization of some of these great masters that we talk about, that we have. It's a great privilege, and Ghazali doesn't have to do it, but he does. Okay. Title of the work. The full title is Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal wal-Musil ila dhil izzati wal-Jalal. The deliverer, literally, so you can say munqidh or munqadh. Munqidh or munqadh. Munqidh means the deliverer, i.e., the title of the book is about God. Allah is the one who delivered me from error. He was my deliverer from error and the one who united me with the Lord of majesty and grace. Or the Lord of might and majesty, I should say. And the other title you could read is Munqadh, deliverance from ever. وَمُصَلْ إِلَى ذِي الْعِزَّةِ وَالْجَلَالِ. And union with the Lord of might and power. The other translation, the other title it's given, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal wal-Mufsih an al-Ahwal. So the one who, the deliverer from error, and the one who basically rectified, sort of, or clarified the spiritual state, my spiritual state. There are no critical editions of the work. For those of you who are big on these things, there are no real critical editions of the work. However, there is in the library in Istanbul, there is a manuscript that is dated 510 after the Hijrah, which is basically around 10 years after he wrote it. Probably actually even less than 10 years, probably 5 or 6, 7 years after he wrote it, and it's a pretty much perfect copy. Pretty much perfect copy. Okay. So, I read the introduction in Arabic. Let's have a look at the English. The most eminent and ascetic master, the ornament of religion and proof of Islam, Abu Hamid Muhammad, son of Muhammad, son of Muhammad Al-Ghazali, said, "Praise be to God, whose praise should preface every writing and discourse. God's blessings be on Muhammad, the elect, divinely gifted with prophethood and apostleship, and upon his kin and companions who guided men away from error." Now, you've asked me, O my brother in religion, to communicate to you the aim and the secrets of the sciences, the dangerous and intricate depths of the different doctrines and views. You want me to give you an account of my travail in disengaging or uncovering the truth from amid the welter of sects, despite their various means and methods. You wish to hear about my daring arising, or my ascent from the lowlands of conformism to the highlands of independent investigation. What profit I derived from the science of theology, from Kalam. What I found loathsome among the methods of the devotees of Ta'aleem, that's Ismaili Shiism, who restrict the truth to uncritical acceptance of the Imam's pronouncements. Thirdly, the methods of philosophy which I scouted. And finally, what pleased me in the way pursued by the practice of Sufism. You also wish to know the quintessential truth disclosed to me in the tortuous course of my inquiry into the views expressed by different men, and specifically what led me to quit teaching in Baghdad despite my many students, and then what induced me to resume teaching in Nisapur much, much later. Convinced of the sincerity of your desire, I am losing no time in answering your request, invoking God's help, placing my trust in Him and imploring His favor, and having recourse to Him. So I say, you should know, first of all, the diversity of men in religions and creeds, plus the disagreement of the community of Islam about doctrines, given the multiplicity of sects and the divergency of methods, is a deep sea in which most men founder and from which only a few are saved. Each group alleges that it is the saved one, and each faction, وَكُلُّ فِرْقَةٍ يَفْرَحُ. What is the Arabic here? It's a Quranic verse actually. Now, of course, I can't find it. All right. كُلُّ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ كُلٌّ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. All of them are, it's a Quranic verse, all of them are happy with their own beliefs. Okay. So, point 1. Ghazali says, and I'll read it actually. In the bloom of my youth and the prime of my life, from the time I reached puberty until now, when I'm over 50, I've constantly been diving into the depths of this profound sea and wading into its ocean like a bold man, not like a cautious coward. I would penetrate far into every murky mystery, pounce upon every problem, dash into every mazy difficulty. I would scrutinize the creed of every sect and seek to lay bare the secrets of each faction's teachings with the aim of discriminating between the proponent of truth and the advocate of error, between the faithful follower of tradition, the mutasannin, and the innovator or the heterodox innovator. So Ghazali first tells us something about himself. And what he tells us is, it's my nature. I have always been a person who sought the truth. And I've never been satisfied simply by someone saying, well, this is the answer to the question and that's that. I always wanted to know. I always wanted to know more. I always wanted to test it, to check it, to prove it, to disprove it, and to find out what actually is the truth. How do I get to the truth? So Ghazali had this need to uncover the truth of the matter from a very young age. He mentions in here the hadith of the fitrah. He said, I used to look around. I saw that people children raised in Christian households become Christian. Children raised in Muslim households become Muslim. Children raised in Jewish households become Jewish. People raised in Shia households become Shia. People raised in Sunni households become Sunni. So, how is this the case? When the truth can only be one, why are there so many different approaches? And I realized that most people simply follow what they've grown up believing. And they each believe that it's the truth. But they believe it's the truth because they've grown up believing it. So Ghazali's getting dangerous already. Okay? But it's a very important point. It's exactly, he said, and I realized the truth of what the Prophet ﷺ said. كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ ثُمَّ أَبَوَاهُ يُحَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. Every child is born with a fitrah. With a fitrah. Then it is their parents that make them Jewish, Christian, Magian, or in another narration, or Muslim. Okay? And this is a very interesting hadith. We won't go into the details of the hadith now, but the question is, what is the fitrah? What is the fitrah? And the fitrah, most of the scholars, there are about 5 or 6 different positions on this. For most of the scholars, some people say the fitrah is Islam. The fitrah is Islam, and this is why this notion of using the word revert as opposed to convert. Okay? And Allah says in the Quran, this is the Deenul Fitrah. Right? This is the religion of the fitrah. But the way most scholars have understood fitrah is in a more neutral way. They say fitrah is the soul's innate sense or innate understanding of God. The soul is created with a need to know God and the tools to know God. So, one example of that is that children very quickly start to learn, innately, I should say, not learn, but innately understand the notion of causality, of cause and effect. It's innate. When you play peekaboo with a baby, right? You play peekaboo with the baby. What do you find? The baby, when you've covered your face and you go like that, then the baby goes, ah, and starts laughing, right? After a while, what you find is that even when you cover your face, the baby's already starting to laugh. Even though you haven't done the peekaboo yet, the baby's starting to laugh already. Why is the baby starting to laugh? Because they know the peekaboo is coming. They know that this is the cause of this. Yeah? Okay, so that peak, that, they have started to understand the notion of cause and effect. Alright? So, this is an innate sense in the child, and it's not present in animals as far as we know. Right? The understanding, these abstract understandings are not present in animals. It's something that's unique to human beings. Alright? So, he's talking about this, and he's saying, look, so just a second, how do you know the truth is the truth? How do you know that what you're following is the truth? So I grew up, and I had Sunni teachers. Why does that mean that the Sunni way is the truth? How do I know it's not another way? How can I determine it? And this was his striving. And this striving lasted his entire life. This is what drove him. If you want to know, and he's telling you here, what drove Ghazali? Yeah, it was this. All right, and this is, it's a staggering thing, but it's a dangerous thing. Because unless you then have the tools, well, you'll see what happens. Unless you have the tools to actually work things out, well, you'll see what happens. All right. So what Ghazali wanted is knowledge that does not admit to the possibility of error. All right. And he said, I'm not talking here about, do I read the basmala aloud when I pray? I'm not talking about that stuff. Because that stuff can only be known from a hadith and so forth. So fiqh, I'm not interested in fiqh from this perspective. Because fiqh is simply saying, given that the Quran is the truth, given that this hadith is authentic, given these principles of usul al-fiqh, the answer is this. He says, but those things are based on givens. Given the Quran is true, given the Sunnah is authentic, given these principles are correct, this is the answer. How do you know this? How do you determine the truth of the givens? How do I know the Quran is correct? How do I know the Sunnah has been preserved? And at the end of the Munqidh, he gives a unique proof of prophethood. He gives a proof of prophethood that no one has ever given before. Yeah, and he gives a proof of prophethood by spiritual experience. How do you determine the truth of the Prophet ﷺ on the basis of his spiritual experiences, or on the basis of your own spiritual experiences? Okay? So he says, look, I looked into all of these things and I found that the givens are only two. The givens are only two. There are only two types of knowledge that ultimately you can break it down, and you can't break it down any further than that. One is your sense perception, and one is what you might call rational truths. Example he gives of sense perception is the sun has risen. This is a sense perception. Okay? Right? Not the sun has risen in the east, or because the sun has risen it's morning, not that, just the sun has risen. Okay? I am sitting. Alright? And the second is rational truths. Things that must be true. What we call in theology the daruriyat aqliya. The rational necessities. 10 is greater than 3. Al-ashara akthara min al-thalath. Right? We know this because of the way these things are defined. Okay. So he says fine. And he starts off there. He says, okay, fair enough. He says, hold on a second. He says, okay, I decided now what I'm going to do. I'm going to restrict my pursuit of knowledge, or my determination of the truth, just to these two. So I dove into those two specifically. And I said, look, can you trust your sense perception? Can you trust your sense perception? The hissiyat. He says, look, I've got this cup. This cup casts a shadow. He says, if you look at a shadow, and you keep looking at the shadow for hours, that shadow always appears to be still. The shadow always appears to be still. You never see the shadow move. Okay? Moment by moment. At every moment the shadow is still. But if you look at that shadow for hours, and you keep looking at the shadow for hours, what do you find? It's moved. It has moved, but you never saw it move. So the shadow, according to your sense perception, is both moving and still. It is still because you can't see it move. But half an hour later, it's in a different place. So it's clearly moved. It's lengthened. So it's clearly changed. But in every single instant you were watching it, it didn't change. He said, I realized you can't trust your sense perception. You can't trust your senses. And this actually is other ulama use a similar, following Ghazali, they use similar things. They talk about, you see someone in the distance, it looks like he's riding on a camel. When he approaches, you realize that he was walking, so you can't trust your sense perception. When you put, something into a glass of water, it appears to have bent. but it clearly hasn't bent, etc., etc. But the example that Ghazali uses is a very powerful one. What he's saying is that sense perception, the shadow example, leads to a logical contradiction. It leads you to affirm that something is still and moving at the same time. And something cannot be both still and moving at the same time. This actually becomes a proof that he will use to prove the existence of God. Something cannot be still and moving at the same time. He uses this concept to disprove the eternity of the universe, the pre-eternity. Sitting in the wrong place. He uses it to disprove the pre-eternity of the universe later on, and he, on the basis that a thing cannot be still and moving at the same time. Okay? Then he says, okay, fine, so what have I got left? What I've got left are the a priori truths. What I've got left are the daruriyat. Something cannot be still and moving at the same time. One cannot be less than, one is not more than 3. Half of 2 is 1. Okay, a square has, we would say, a square has 4 sides. You cannot have a circular square. A circular square is a logical contradiction. And he says, fine. So I thought, fine, I will restrict my investigation then. I will leave sense perception. And I will restrict my investigations, my determining of the truth, to only what is rationally necessary and nothing else. What happens then? So he says, I scrutinized all my cognitions, and I found myself devoid of any knowledge answering this description of certain knowledge, except sense data and self-evident truths. Okay? He looked at self-evident truths, and he said, as he said is clear, the strongest of the senses, right? He said, what happened? He said, my soul began to doubt my sense data. From whence comes your reliance on sense data? The strongest of the senses is the sense of sight. Now, this looks at a shadow and sees it standing still and motionless, and judges that it is not moving. Then, due to experience and observation, an hour later, it knows the shadow is moving. It did not move with a sudden spurt, but so gradually and imperceptibly that it was never completely still. Sight also looks at a star, and sees at the sun, and sees that it is something small, the size of a dinar, but geometrical proofs indicate that it surpasses the earth in its size. If you look at he uses the example of the sun and the moon. He says, the sun and the moon look the same size. By the way, the only place in the known universe, where you can have a perfect eclipse of the sun. What do I mean by a perfect eclipse? Where the moon, a moon of a planet fits exactly over the disk of the sun. Exactly. Such that, you know, if you see a solar eclipse, it covers the disk of the sun exactly, and you can see the atmosphere of the sun. You can see the corona, which is the sun's atmosphere. The hottest, well, one of the hottest parts of the sun is the corona, yeah? The only place in the known universe where that's possible is Earth. Right? Other places, you find that either the moon is too small or the moon is too big. It doesn't just cover the sun, it covers way more than the sun. So if you go out to, I don't know, Saturn, for example, right? The sun is tiny, and the moons are huge. All right? So the only place in the known universe that we know. Why? Because the sun is exactly 800 times, I think, the diameter of the moon, but the moon is exactly 800 times closer to the earth than the sun. Okay? And he uses that example. He says, your sense perception will tell you that the sun and the moon are the same size. If you look at the geometric proofs, it's clear that the moon is smaller than the earth and the sun is massively bigger than the earth. But because of the distance they are away, and this is Ghazali says this, in actually Tahafut al-Falasifa, the work of the incoherence of the philosophers. And he uses this to show that not all philosophy is bad. He said, this is maths, and you can't deny the maths. And if you deny the maths, then not only are you a fool, but you make the religion seem foolish, because you deny mathematics on the basis of religion, or on the basis of your incorrect understanding of religion. Right? And then what you do is you turn intelligent people away. And you'll see it as we go through. Ghazali has a big problem with what he calls ignorant defenders of truth. ignorant defenders of religion. Yeah? If that rings any bells, then please don't come to me. So he says, I realized that my reliance on sense data became untenable. Therefore, I can only rely on rational data that belongs to the category of primary truths, such as asserting that 10 is more than 3, that one and the same thing cannot be simultaneously affirmed and denied. You cannot say there is a cup and there isn't a cup. There either is a cup or there isn't a cup. It can't be both. Okay? Alright? So, but then look at what happens now. He says, then sense data spoke up. He's having a conversation in his head. Right? And so rational truths are saying to sense data, you're rubbish, you're talking nonsense. You're saying the shadow isn't moving, but the shadow is moving. What? You're useless. Go away. Right? So rational truths have the title. They're in. Then the empire strikes back, right? So sense data comes back and says, wait a minute, Abu Hamid. He wasn't Abu Hamid. He was probably in his teens at this stage. He probably wasn't Abu Hamid yet. But Muhammad, wait. What assurance do you have that your reliance on rational data is not like your reliance on sense data? He says, you used to have confidence in me. It's like two wives. You used to love me. You used to have confidence in me. Then reason comes along and made you realize that I was wrong. If it were not for the judge of your rational truths, you would never have known that I was incorrect, that your sense data was incorrect. How do you know that beyond the perception of reason, there isn't another judge? There isn't another form of knowledge. If the latter revealed itself, it would show that the judgments of reason are incorrect. The mere fact of the non-appearance of that higher judge does not prove the impossibility of its existence. You vetoed sense data, the truth that sense data is a source of ultimate truth on the basis of rational truths. How do you know there isn't a veto of rational truths beyond what you can see? Shall I show you an example of this? Would you like to see an example of this? This is my show and tell demonstration. How many dimensions are there? Chup. 3 dimensions. What are the dimensions of physical existence? Length. That's one dimension. What's the next one? Breadth. What's breadth? Breadth is a line at 90 degrees to this line here, which is that. Okay? Clear? What's depth? 3rd dimension. It's a line that's at 90 degrees to this line and 90 degrees to this line. So there. Okay? What's the 4th dimension? What would be a 4th dimension of physical space? It's a line that's at 90 degrees to this line, and to this line, and to this line. At 90 degrees to all 3. Can you draw it? So imagine an XY axis and then a Z axis running through it. Okay? Imagine a line that is at 90 degrees to all 3 of those lines. Does it exist? No. But mathematically it must. Mathematically, there has to be a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and possibly 9th dimension of physical space. Why can't you perceive it? Why can't you imagine it in your head? So put it another way. You can imagine a 2-dimensional object, right? You just draw a square on a page. You can imagine a 3-dimensional object, kind of extends out from the page, like a cube. Can you imagine a 4-dimensional object? No, but 4-dimensional objects must exist according to very advanced mathematics that I don't understand. 4-dimensional objects must exist, but we can't perceive them. Why can't we perceive them? Because our brains are structured wrong. Our brains are just structured wrong. The way our brains are structured, you can perceive things in 3 dimensions. But there are higher dimensions. If you do the maths, you'll see that there have to be higher dimensions. In order for there to be one law that the entire universe operates on the basis of, what's called the superstring theory or M theory or whatever it is, there have to be more than 4 dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time. That's what we can perceive. Everything in the universe accords with that, except in these very theoretical physics, when you're looking at what happened. So how do you explain the Big Bang, for example? Right? How does physics explain the Big Bang? Physics can explain everything that happened in the entire history of the universe except for the first few nanoseconds after the Big Bang. The first few nanoseconds after the Big Bang, physics goes out of the window. In fact, gravity reverses itself, it reverses its polarity, weird things happen. And it's unexplainable unless you postulate the existence of higher dimensions, and these are higher dimensions that cannot be ever observed because we don't have the right brains. Because our ability to understand is simply, it just goes beyond our ability. Right? And there's no way we can overcome that. So although maths can postulate the existence of higher dimensions, i.e. to say there have to be higher dimensions in order for the Big Bang, which we know happened, in order for the Big Bang to have happened, there have to be higher dimensions. But there's no way we can test for the higher dimensions, there's no way we can check for them, there's no way we can do experiments, there's no way we can understand them even if they were there, even if we picked them up we couldn't understand them. Does this sound like anything to you? Yet? Yeah? What's the greatest critique of string theory or M theory from scientists? Do you know what it is? It's a religion. String theory is a religion. Why is it a religion? It is faith on an unprovable yet necessary form of existence. You believe in a form of existence that there is no way you can possibly prove, but which must exist in order for the rest of your beliefs to work. That's what a religion is. Yeah? That's why I had a conversation with somebody once about, this was a chap who entered Islam and then left Islam, and I had a conversation with this person about why he left Islam and that kind of stuff. And he said, no, he said, look, things like, I read this book, book by Stephen Hawking and this and that and the other, and I said, he says Stephen Hawking says gravity created everything. So I thought, so Stephen Hawking does believe in God. He said, no, he doesn't believe in God. I said, yes, he does. He just believes that God is gravity. That's the only difference. He believes that God is, hold on, God is gravity. He said, what do you mean? I said, look. He is saying there is no creator of the universe except for gravity. Right? La mujid lil khalq illa gravity. Like we would say, La mujid lil khalq illa Allah. No, wait, you're laughing, but you shouldn't be laughing. What is gravity? Gravity is a force. I mean, the argument is a ridiculous argument, because if you say everything came from gravity, but gravity is a relational force. You can only have gravity if you have two particles. Because gravity describes the attraction of the two particles to each other. If you don't have two particles, there can be no gravity. But so how can you say gravity created particles when gravity needs particles in order to exist? Right? So to have gravity you need particles, but to have particles you need gravity. But this is chicken and egg. This is basically chicken and egg. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? To get a chicken you need an egg. To get an egg you need a chicken. But to get a chicken you need an egg. Right? This is tasalsul. So it's a silly argument. But even you take it, you say, okay, even if it did, what you're saying is a power. So this thing that created everything has power. Question, is that power directed by a will or not directed by a will? What do I mean by that? When you're sleeping, okay, and you're sleeping and you suddenly kick out in your sleep. Did you kick? Yes. Did you choose to kick? No. It was a reflex action for whatever reason. But you didn't choose it, did you? Okay? So you're sleeping with your wife, and you kind of go like that. And she goes, "What are you hitting me for? What did I do now?" Yeah? And you say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. "Oh, but you hit me." "Yeah, but I didn't mean to hit you." What is that? It is a power. It's qudra, without irada. It's a power without will. Is the power of gravity directed by a will, or is it not directed by a will? Is it a blind power or a directed power? So he says, "No, I don't know." I said, "Look, Stephen Hawking will say to you, it is an undirected power." Okay? That everything came into existence by means of a power that was not directed by a will. We would say no. Everything came into existence by a power that was directed by a will. That the power was on the basis of a choice, and the choice was on the basis of knowledge. Okay? So when you say, "I want ice cream," that's your will. Right? Now, whether you get the ice cream, that's a different matter. Do you have the power to attain the ice cream? You're in the shops and you see, Haagen-Dazs, pralines and cream. And you say, I want that, but I don't have the money. Okay? I want it, but I don't have the money. So you have the will, but you don't have the power to bring your will into effect. Alright? But when I'm going shopping, and, I get a text message saying, "Bring some Haagen-Dazs, pralines and cream." Okay? What's now the person who sent that message to me? What they are choosing. I am their agent, they are choosing. What are they choosing on the basis of? On the basis of their knowledge that there is such a thing as Haagen-Dazs, pralines and cream. Okay? So power is based on will. Will is based on knowledge. So the thing that created the universe either is just a blind force, or it is directed by a will. If it's directed by a will, that will must have knowledge, because knowledge, all a will is choosing. You can ask for Haagen-Dazs, pralines and cream, or whatever, the strawberry shortcake, or this flavor, or that flavor, or the other flavor. You've chosen one of them. You know about 5, you've chosen one. That's what will is. It's picking between possibilities. So in order for there to be a will, there must be a knowledge. If that thing has knowledge, the thing that you're talking about has knowledge, it must have knowledge of everything, because everything has come from it. If it must have knowledge of everything, it must have knowledge of itself. And if it has knowledge of itself, then it is self-aware. And if it is self-aware, then it is living. Because that's the definition of life. Self-aware existence. So now the thing that created the universe, you can call it gravity if you want, I don't mind. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. Right? Allah has the most beautiful names, call him by whichever of the names you want is fine. Right? But that thing that brought the universe into existence has power, will, knowledge, life, is therefore existent. All we're saying now is we call it God. That's the only difference. Okay? So this is how you make these arguments. So anyway, so this is the type of approach that the Ghazali takes, actually. That's exactly the argument he gives. What the argument I've just given you now, it's exactly the argument that the Ghazali gives. That's his argument for the existence of God. Yeah? But the point is, this is what he's saying in the work. He said, how do you know there is not something higher than what you have the ability, your reason? Your reason is a faculty. How do you know there's not a high judge that you're simply not aware of? How do you know that your reason is giving you ultimate truth? He says, for a brief space, my soul hesitated. And sense data reinforced their difficulty by appealing to dreaming. So, look, don't you see that when you were asleep, you believe certain things, you imagine certain circumstances, you believe that they are fixed, they are lasting, you've got no doubts when you're in a dream that what's happening to you is real. You have no doubt when you're in a dream that what's happening to you in that dream is real. Then you wake up and you realize that all your previous imaginings were groundless, they were insubstantial. So while everything you believe through sensation or intellectual endeavor in your waking state may be true in relation to your current state, this is the brain example, Right? Oh, 3 dimensions, of course, 3 dimensions. But how do you know that when your soul is freed of the limitations of your neurons? Because the brain is the tool of intellection. It's the ma'qal. From if you like, from a psychological point of view, what is the brain? The brain is ma'qal al-ruh. It is the tool that the soul uses to perceive existence. Okay? It's the car you're in. How do you know? Right? When you get out and maybe get into another car, or you're driving an old banger, right? Or you're driving a car, but you're going to the airport. So what you perceive of the reality of the world is that the world is kind of 15 miles, 15 miles around you, which is about as far as you can see. Okay? It's that 15 miles, that's all that you would see of the universe. You don't know there's anything more beyond that. But you're going to get in a plane. And when you get in a plane, you're going to have a completely different view of exactly that same thing. You're going to see it from a completely different perspective, from a perspective that you could never have imagined. I mean, we can imagine it because, we've all been on planes or seen people who've got, seen pictures and that sort of stuff. But how do you know? Yeah? When you're in the eye of a storm, what do you think has happened? When you're in the eye of a hurricane, you think the hurricane is over. If you were to look at a satellite picture, you would realize you're only in the eye of the storm. That it's coming back. Okay? This is exactly the point he's making. While you believe, everything that you believe, through your sense data, through your rational processes, may be true in relation to that state, what assurance do you have that you may not suddenly experience a state that would be like your relation, like waking up from a dream? How do you know that you would not suddenly, when you die, and your soul is freed of your body, that actually everything is completely different? That perspective is completely different. Now you're seeing in 10 dimensions. You're not seeing in 3 anymore. Now you're seeing in 10 dimensions. Yeah? If you found yourself in such a state, you would be sure that all your rational beliefs were unsubstantial fancies, just like your dreams. Just like your belief that the shadow is still when it's actually moving. No, rational data is not deliberated by the so you've got 3 types of senses. He's coming to the point. You've got 3 types of senses. You've got your physical senses, you've got your intellectual senses, and you've got your spiritual senses. Yeah? These are 3 types of faculties that you have. Physical data is the shadow is moving or the shadow is still. Right? This thing on the horizon is coming towards me or it's going away from me. Rational senses, the square root of 4 is 2. Right? 1 plus 1 is 2. This is, or as he says, 10 is greater than 3. This is rational senses. A thing cannot be moving and still at the same time. You can't be a married bachelor. Okay? But then there are spiritual, and he hasn't come to that yet. This point he hasn't realized in his life yet. He hasn't got there. So he says this, and he uses the example of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. An-nasu na'imun, wa idha matu intahabu. People are asleep. When they die, they wake up. Okay? What happened? When these thoughts occurred to me, they penetrated my soul. I tried to deal with the objection, but my effort was unsuccessful, because the objection can only be refuted by proof. But the only way for me to put forth proof was to combine primary cognitions. To disprove what my senses are telling me, I either have to use my senses or I have to use my rational senses. And both of them, I have a doubt about both of them now. So what do? This malady was mysterious. It lasted for nearly 2 months. During that time, I was a skeptic in fact, but not in utterance and doctrine. I believed in God. He's saying, I was a skeptic in terms of, right, what is now, important point here, what is this epistemological crisis of Ghazali? Was it, I don't believe in God? No. It was, I don't know if a person can reach absolute truth. if it is possible to reach ultimate truth. He said, but in doctrine, I believed in God, I believed in the Prophet ﷺ, etc., etc. I used, did everything, but that's why you say it was not people to talk about a crisis of faith. It wasn't, Western people talk about a crisis of faith. It wasn't a crisis of faith. It was a crisis of epistemology. How can you determine the truth yourself? He's not even saying, he's saying, is it even in the presence of revelation, is it possible to attain absolute truth? He's saying there is a truth, the truth, revelation is true, the Quran is true, etc., etc., right? But the ways to determine their absolute truthfulness is based on is there a fundamental incapacity in the human being that they are unable to grasp truth even when it is presented to them, because of a weakness in the revelation, but because of a weakness in their own apprehension of truth. Remember, this is all going back to the question is, how come if a Christian child grows up in a Christian household, they become Christian, and then you can't convince them that Islam is the truth, even though it's so clear? What's the reason for that inability? And so the reason is you're ultimately relying on either, and this comes back to the very first line of the Sharh Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, advanced work of theology, where he says that we believe, or Imam al-Nasafi says, we believe that things really exist. This is fantastic, how work of Aqidah begins, right? نؤمن أن الأشياء ثابتة وعلمها متحقق. Right? We believe, he says, the beginning of this work of Aqidah, not that God is one, no, we believe that things really exist and you can gain knowledge of them. That's how the work of Aqidah begins. And the commentary says you gain knowledge in three ways: sense data, right? The hissiyat, the sense data; al-ma'qulat, rational, the pure rationality, that's the 10 is greater than 3, or through khabar sadiq, through a truthful account, or through a reliable narrator of the truth. Most of the things that we believe because of khabar sadiq. All that stuff I told you now about gravity and about, atoms and electrons and blah de blah. What, do you know all this stuff? No, you don't know it. It's a khabar sadiq. You trust me, and so on the basis of your trust of me, you accept it. Someone grows up in a zindiq household. Okay, so who do they grow up believing certain things on the basis of those that they trust. But if those that they trust are untrustworthy, or how do they determine the person is untrustworthy? Point number one. Okay, let's assume the person's untrustworthy. What's left? Sense perception. That's untrustworthy. What's left? Rational perception. That's possibly untrustworthy. Now what? Now what? How do you know the truth is true? Is it possible for a human being to know the truth is true? Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa. Oh Allah, let me see the truth as true. Let me see falsehood as false. As Sayyidina Ali kind of passed this dua of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Allahumma arina al-ashya'a kama hiya. Oh Allah, show me things as they truly are. Without the divine assistance, is this possible? And the answer is no. No. And because it's not possible, that is why we talk that that's why Allah says to the Prophet ﷺ, you cannot give faith to whom you please. Laysa alayka hadahum. It is not your responsibility to bring guidance to them. Walakin Allah yahdi man yasha. Allah will guide who He wants to, because you can bring everything to them. You can bring the sun down, you can split the moon, you can do what you like. Okay? Because they are reliant on this, and this, because all of the three are unreliable. Ultimately, because there is deficiency in the human being. There is a deficiency. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Allah says, man is created weak. Meaning what? That we'll die? Yes. That we'll get sick? Yes. That we don't actually have the tools to apprehend reality as it is. And therefore faith is not a given, but a giving. It's not a given, it's a gift. Yes. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. And this is what Ghazali is realizing. Okay? And he says, I was knocked flat. I couldn't get out of this one. I couldn't escape from it. He basically saying I went into a depression. Because I just couldn't figure it out. At length, however, God cured me of that sickness. My soul regained its health and equilibrium, and once again I accepted the self-evident data of reason and relied on it with safety and certainty. So what he's saying is, I couldn't answer what the sense is, what the shaitan basically had told him. Right? I couldn't answer it, but God cured me. So this is the first of the divine interventions in Ghazali's life. Yeah? That he was saved by God. And God put a light into his heart. As he says, whoever Allah wishes to guide aright, he dilates his breast with submission. Yeah? Or Allah casts a light into his heart. Allah cast a light into my heart, and I realized, yes, I can trust rational truths. Yes, 10 is more than 3. In any possible world, 10 is more than 3. Okay, but I could not, and this is the point. This is where I said people have been destroyed by this. People have been destroyed by this. Nietzsche went mad. Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, he went mad. He went mad because he could, he could not square this circle. He found himself, do I believe in a square circle? And he couldn't, literally, he couldn't do it. And he actually drove him insane. A lot of mathematicians, what's the collective noun? This is true. The collective noun for a group of mathematicians? A depression of mathematicians. A depression of mathematicians. Right? Because things get scary. When you start dealing with concepts of infinity, and it comes in the proofs of theology, when you start dealing with concepts of infinity, well, things get really weird. Things get really, really weird at that point. Yeah? What's half of infinity? If you take infinity and you divide it by 2, what's half of infinity? Infinity. So you've now got 2 infinities. So you've got an infinite length, you divide it into 2, they are infinitely long. But yet one must clearly be less than the other. You've got infinity, you take 1 away from infinity. What's left? Infinity. It's the same length as infinity, but you've taken 1 away from it. How does that work? Yeah? It's weird stuff. Anyway. Okay. He says, my soul regained its health and equilibrium. Once again I accepted the self-evident data of reason and relied on it with safety and certainty. But this was not achieved by constructing a proof or putting together an argument. On the contrary, it was a light that God cast into my heart. And that light is the key to true knowledge. Okay? Okay. So then he brings this beautiful hadith, actually. So he says, well, he speaks about this, he whom God wishes to guide aright, he dilates his heart for submission to himself. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about this. The Prophet ﷺ said, it is a light which God casts into the heart. Someone said, what is the sign of that light? The Prophet ﷺ said, withdrawal from the mansion of delusion and turning to the mansion of immortality. Alright? From that light then, the unveiling of truth must be sought. Moreover, that light gushes forth from the divine generosity at certain times, and one must be on the watch for it. This is a beautiful hadith, he says, yeah? He says, because the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ فِي دَهْرِ أَيَّامِكُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ لَنَفَحَاتٍ. Right? Your Lord, in the days of your life, on some occasions in your life, sends forth gusts of grace. Accept them. إِنَّ فِي دَهْرِ أَيَّامِكُمْ لَنَفَحَاتٍ. There are sometimes you will just experience, you will just get a breath of divine mercy. Keep an eye out for those times. Watch out for those times. Yeah, a sudden inspiration, a message from God, an easing of suffering. These are breaths of the divine mercy. These are breaths of the divine light. Okay? Okay. So then he moves on. That was the crisis of skepticism over. He said, right, okay, now I can rely on reason. Where do I go from here? So let me investigate those who claim to have the truth. And there are 4 groups of people that claim absolute truth. The theologians, the philosophers, the Batiniya, or the adherents of Ta'aleem, those who follow an infallible or claim to follow an infallible Imam, and then the Sufis. All of these four groups claim that they have an ultimate truth. So he said, I decided then to investigate them. I decided to investigate them. How? He says, look, one can only assess a claim after fully understanding it. Alright? So he ploughed into the study of the fields one after the other until he achieved mastery of them. Now Ghazali was only able to do this because he had mastered the preceding levels. I'll explain to you what this means in a second. It's also because of this that his critique of those sciences was so devastating. He could not be accused of having fundamentally misunderstood the subject. So Ghazali went into each of these. He mastered each of these claimants to truth, each of these claims of truth. Okay? And he said, with each of them there is an issue, except for the last one. He said, with each of them there is an issue. There's a problem. And I'm going to explain what that problem is. My critique is a strong critique. Why? Because I've mastered it. I haven't just looked from the outside and said, oh, it doesn't look right. I've gone inside. And we're going to come to this now. Okay? Now, just on the notion of this issue of skepticism and these two avenues for truth, the hissiyat and the daruriyat, I've got a little note here for those of you who are interested in philosophy. This is the Ghazalian version of positivism, logical positivism. The idea that authoritative knowledge can only be derived from sense data or logical axioms. Intuition and introspection are to be rejected. So before God saved him and cast the light into his heart, he said, I can only rely on two things. Sense data, logical axioms. Okay, and this is called positivism. It was developed and popularized in the 19th century by a French philosopher called Comte. Its descendant is logical positivism, the attempt to reduce every statement to a priori logical axioms. Many of the philosophers of science criticize this for reductionism, such as Karl Popper and Heisenberg, who was the founder of quantum mechanics. Right? They said, actually Popper and Heisenberg both said there are truths beyond material truths, and there are truths beyond rational truths. We don't know what they are, but they are there. So one of the great critiques of, and the reason I say this is because the approach that is taken by a lot of the people in our time to prove the non-existence of God is positivism. We will only accept sense data or logical axioms and nothing else. Okay? This is critiqued. Ghazali was unable to find the way out of positivism until he experienced the sublime grace of God. And this effectively proved it to be an empty and incorrect theory. Okay, so Ghazali then investigates. Now, it's a quick excursus. What are the levels of knowledge? Now this is actually not taken from Ghazali, although he alludes to it. Ghazali, you'll find in his life, he prefaced many of the developments of philosophy. He kind of foreshadowed 1,000 years of philosophical discussion in his lifetime. Okay? Well, I should say, in the 2 years that he spent studying philosophy. It's really irritating when you hear about people like that. But anyway, but this is actually taken from, any teachers here? Teachers? I know there's one teacher here. Bloom's taxonomy. This is Bloom's taxonomy. That's fascinating. That reaction from both of you is just fascinating. Okay. There was a dude called Bloom. Don't know anything about him. But he looked at the levels of knowledge. And he looked at it from 3 domains. One is cognitive. One is, I think, motor, which is like skill. So cognitive is about knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge. Motor is about the acquisition of skill. And affective, which is about the acquisition of attitudes. Okay? We're looking here at the cognitive domain. You'll have done this as well, right? All right? He said there are 6 levels of mastery of something. One is knowledge, and knowledge is the ability to learn and recall information. So you guys are going for a class, you studied the thing, so you guys, those of you doing Arabic, okay, you go away and you You can say, lam yadrib, lam yadriba, lam yadribu, lam tadrib, lam tadrib. You can recall that stuff. That's knowledge. The next level is comprehension. Comprehension is that lam tadriba has three meanings. Right? They two females did not hit. You two males did not hit. You two females did not hit. The noon has dropped because the lam causes jazm. Okay? Etc. And it turns it to a past tense. It makes it past tense. It takes the mudari form, puts it in the past tense. Don't worry if it's Greek to you guys. You don't need to know it. Alright? Except for those of you learning Arabic, you absolutely need to know it. That's comprehension. That's understanding the knowledge that you've been given. The level beyond that is application. Application is putting that understanding into practice. Now I give you Nahmad and Hayward, and here is a sentence, and you're able to translate that sentence, or rather take it from the English and put it into the Arabic on the basis of the knowledge that you have. So there is a particular sentence, you might have to say, okay, this is a jumla ismiya. If it's a jumla ismiya, it has a mubtada and a khabar. If it has a mubtada, the mubtada, here is the mudaf and the mudaf ilayh. If this is a mudaf and a mudaf ilayh, then this is how you got to construct it. And because the mudaf is dual, I've got to drop the noon and all that kind of stuff, and you do that and you construct a sentence. That's application of knowledge. Okay? The next is analysis. And analysis is understanding the deeper structures. So for example, if something is غير منصرف, why is it غير منصرف? Why do certain things make a word غير منصرف? What is the difference of opinion between the Kufans and the Basrans on this concept, on this topic? Okay? Why is it present in the language? Is there any basis for it? This is all analysis. Analysis of the information. In fiqh, you find a lot of analysis. So you'll see a particular mas'ala, and you understand the legal cause of that mas'ala. You understand it on the basis of your studies of usul al-fiqh, that there is a particular axiom, a legal axiom that applies. A command does or does not entail repetition, for example. So if Allah says, aqim as-salah, does He mean once or does He mean repeatedly? Or does He mean every time the cause occurs, then you establish the prayer? So you understand these things, and then you can look at it, you can understand, and so forth. Then the next level is synthesis. And synthesis is basically being able to write originally on a subject. Synthesis is when you can write your own grammatical textbook. That's when you can write your own textbook of grammar. That's when you can teach a subject. You can take the information, you can put it together in a new way. Okay? You can advance the science because you can take this information, put it together in a new way, get new understandings out of it. Like Ghazali we mentioned last week in Usul al-Fiqh, he was the first person to explicate the notion that every rule of the religion returns to one of 5 kind of principles or purposes of religion. The preservation of religion, the preservation of life, wealth, dignity, dignity, intellect, and property. Okay, so he can reformulate that knowledge, and that's much higher now. So I'm not talking about sarf and stuff now because we're not going to reach there. All right, but that's called synthesis, and the last level is called evaluation. And this is the key. Evaluation is being able to take the knowledge, assess its strengths, assess its weaknesses, critique it, reformulate it, and advance the subject. Okay, that's evaluation, and that's the highest level of cognitive mastery. Now, what's the issue? What I might call, and I, if I ever meet Harun Yahya, I'm going to have to apologize to him a lot, but the Harun Yahya approach to evolution. Maybe not him himself, but certainly his devotees, you might put it that way. Their approach is that they are evaluating theories of evolution without having gone through the other aspects of the science. You're evaluating something, but you haven't gone through synthesis, analysis, application, and so forth. You're going from knowledge, maybe. You've read a book. You're pretty sure you understand what's in that book. You're critiquing. Okay? You've jumped too many steps. You don't have the requisite tools to critique until you can synthesize. You can't synthesize until you can analyze. You can't analyze until you can apply. And this is precisely the point that Ghazali is making. Right? And he will make this throughout the Munqidh. He says, for example, that he had a friend of his who was who used to be an Ismaili Shia. And he says that our lot, or my former lot, when they hear the theologians' attempts to refute theology, they laugh. To refute ta'aleem, they laugh. They see these guys are idiots. They don't even understand what we're saying. All they're doing is tearing down straw men. Right? They're tearing down straw men. What's a straw man? A straw man is, here is my argument. So what do you attack? This. What you do is, so I'm going to have I challenge you to not me, but someone challenges you to a boxing match. And you say, yeah, I'm going to box you. And what you do is you get a cardboard cutout of Muhammad Ali, and you start punching the cardboard cutout of Muhammad Ali, and you knock it down. You say, I've beaten Muhammad Ali. No, you haven't. You've beaten a cardboard cutout of Muhammad Ali that couldn't hit back. As Bruce Lee famously said, boards don't hit back. Right? Yeah? That's what attacking a straw man is. Right? You're not attacking the argument. You're attacking what you perceive to be the argument, or what you've constructed to be their argument, which is a very weak argument. Then you knock it down and say, I've won. Okay? That's what Ghazali said. You can't do that. No. If you're going to attack them, you're going to fight Muhammad Ali, you're going to have a rumble in the jungle, go train. Go and train. He says, I trained. I learnt it. I studied it. I went into depth. And you'll see this with his works. I went into depth. Once I had gone through knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and then I evaluated their arguments. And that's the great triumph of Ghazali. That's why his works were so powerful, because he did this. And when he at the end got to tasawwuf, how do you assess the truth claims of the Sufis? Go and become a Sufi. Go and become a Sufi. So he said, I went and became a Sufi. When I became a Sufi, I realized that yes, that judge that's over the reason judge, now that judge unveiled himself to me. Now that judge unveiled himself to me. And he says, you can do this too. Shaykh Hamza makes a lovely point. In one of his talks, he said that Ghazali's approach was a very modern approach. Okay? Why is it a modern approach? A scientific approach. Because what he did what the Sufis say is, here is an experiment. If you do the things that we do in the way that we show you to do it, you will experience the same outcome as we experienced. Okay? That is called replicability. In a scientific theory, this is called replicability, right? An experiment must be replicable. If you do the same experiment under the same conditions, with the same ingredients, you will get the same result. If you don't get the same result, our theory is wrong. Right? The Sufis said the same thing. You do the same thing, same same ingredients, same processes, etc., you'll get the result. Ghazali said, I did it, and I got the result. And if you do it, you'll get the result too. Okay? Right. Yes. Oh, no. In this way, no. Not in exactly this way, but in a very similar way. So he spoke about mere knowledge not being enough, mere comprehension not being sufficient. He didn't really speak about analysis. He did talk about, in the work, he talks about analysis. He certainly demonstrated synthesis. Okay, he demonstrated synthesis. And then he clearly evaluated. Those were the books that he wrote. Yeah? Okay. So he said, I started with the path of the philosophers. The path of the theologians. All right? And this was the earliest studies, the earliest major studies he did with Juwayni, who we said last week was the unrivaled master of theology, the greatest theologian on the face of the earth, one of the greatest theologians that has ever lived. He studied with Juwayni. He says, I studied and I wrote books in theology. He doesn't go into much detail about this. Why did he start with theology though? He started with theology because this is the orthodox approach. This is the orthodox approach. This is what my own upbringing, my own actual upbringing, my own scholarly upbringing has been suffused by the claim that ilmul kalam can give you true knowledge of God. So I studied it, I studied with the greatest master of the time, I wrote books on it. Now perhaps we understand why he went to Nisapur. It may be, he doesn't say it, but maybe he went to Nisapur because he said, right, okay, theologians claim to have the truth. Who is the greatest master of theology? Al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain. Let me go and study with him. And he went and he studied and he asked questions and asked and asked. And he said all sorts of things to Juwayni as well. And he, as we said last week, was, he venerated Juwayni a lot. However, he said, basically, the long and short of it, theology is adequate for its own purposes. But its purpose is not true knowledge of God. Its purpose is to refute heterodox groups. Its purpose is to refute innovation. And it refutes innovation very well, but what it doesn't do is uncover the truth. He said it was not suitable for my purposes. I want to know if this science can uncover truth as it is. No, it can't. No, it can't. Okay? Why? Because it relies on assumed premises that are not a priori, but are accepted because your opponents submit to them. Right? Allah says in the Quran, say to the people of the book, ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum. Let us come together to agree on what we agree on. Allah na'budu illa Allah. We do not worship other than Allah. وَلَا نُشْرِكُ بِهِ شَيْئًا. And we don't associate partners with God. We agree, Christians, you say to a Christian, do you worship other than God? No. Do you associate partners with God? No. Christian, you ask a Christian, are you monotheist or polytheist? The Christian will tell you, monotheist. I'm a monotheist. We agree on that. We agree that only God is to be worshipped. We agree that we do not associate partners with God. Now, let's talk about the definition of God. Because that's where we differ. Now the only thing left to prove is that Jesus cannot be God. Because Jesus came into existence. Jesus came into existence. And a God cannot come into existence. Done. Okay? He says, however, the assumption is we worship none but God. What if you say, I don't agree with that assumption? That's a different debate. That then becomes a different debate. Okay? So the way that you would talk to a Christian about Islam is not the same way you talk to a Buddhist, or you talk to a Hindu, or you talk to an idol worshipper about Islam. Okay? The point is that theology is a refutatory science. The purpose of theology, one of my teachers said, we said to him once, we learned to study a lot of fiqh with him, and we said to him once, why don't you teach us some theology? And he said, you want to learn aqidah? We said, yeah. He said, okay, repeat after me. Amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhir wal qadr khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah wal ba'athi ba'da al maut la ilaha illallah. Now you know enough theology. Let's get back to fiqh. And he left it at that, but the point is very true. The point is that if you believe in that and you never have any questions about it, you don't need anything else. The problem is, we have questions about it. People will develop understandings, wrong understandings, on the basis of their own experiences, knowledge, prejudices, etc., etc. What happens? Now you need to say, no, it's not that. No, this. Right, so you're all going along very nicely, and what happens? Well, there's two types of theology. One is the theology for the people on the journey. You say, don't turn that way, come back this way. Where's Atif? He's probably with his son somewhere, right? Yeah, I remember we were driving this convoy to, to Syria. We're driving along and it'll be on the radio. No. Second turn on the roundabout, not the third turn. Oh my God, if you take the third turn, you're going to be heading towards Nice, right? Not the third turn. Come back, turn around, come back. This is theology. This is theology. If everyone stayed on the same track, there's no reason for that. And the other part of theology is what? When people are coming to try to pull you away. Okay, and we mentioned that last week. But the point is, if there's never an objection, there's never a point raised. There's never an argument that needs to be made. It's very interesting that in the works of Aqidah, for example, the fadila of the Sahaba is mentioned a lot, but the fadila of the Ahlul Bayt is never mentioned in the books of theology. And we believe in the sanctity of the Ahlul Bayt. It's not mentioned in any of the books of theology. Why not? No one ever had a problem with that. No one raised a question about it. So if there's no question raised, there's no reason to answer it. Yeah? Because it's in the Quran, it's very clear. And there were, and in the period where there were objections to, the Ahlul Bayt and stuff, then those points were made. But when the great works of theology were written, no one had any. That was a done and dusted debate. It was done. It was dusted. The only issue was the overemphasis on the Ahlul Bayt to the exclusion of the other Sahaba, and so that's what was focused on in the books of theology. Point is, theology relies on assumed premises, and because it doesn't investigate the assumed premises any further, you can't uncover the truth, the ultimate truth with theology. And also, he says, it discusses fields other than theology that are not thoroughgoing. So, theologians are, some of the books, the long books, you'll find whole chapters on the nature of hearing. Yeah? And, we read them, we kind of think, gosh, this is painful stuff, because what do they know about sound waves and, that kind of stuff. But you find whole chapters, and what does how you hear have to do with whether God is one? Well, in some remote, arcane way, yes it does. But Ghazali says the problem is, the theologians get caught up in discussions like that, about which they are not experts. Sound familiar? About which they are not experts. They get refuted roundly by philosophers who are experts in that. Yeah? And those philosophers then set up the theologian's lack of knowledge of what the nature of hearing as a straw man, knock it down and say, you see, the whole of Islamic theology is false. All right? He says, so theology is like medicine. You only take medicine if you have to, for diseases that require it, in doses that are needed, and under the instruction of a skilled practitioner. Otherwise, it's poisonous. It's going to harm you. And he talks about that a lot in the Ihya at great length, so we won't go into it now. I'm wondering whether we should get into this. Because his focus on the philosophers is lengthy. His discussion of philosophy, not lengthy, I mean it's... Yeah, I mean, I think we'll leave it there, if you guys don't mind. I know it's slipping, but these discussions are interesting discussions. They're important to have. I don't want to rush philosophy, and the reason I don't want to rush philosophy is although we don't tend to have many philosophers in modern times, okay, you won't really encounter philosophers. What you will encounter is scientists masquerading as philosophers. Scientists who actually base their arguments for the non-existence of God on philosophical premises that they don't understand. All right. So these three types here, the Dahriya are actually called materialists. Tabi'iyya are sort of material positivists. The Ilahiyya are the deists. So what you find basically is, if a philosopher believes in God today, they're probably a deist. So most sort of Christian scientists, as in a scientist who are Christian, a good example would be, who are the two guys who did the Human Genome Project thing? There was Wilson, there was one called Wilson, one called Miller, I think. Yeah, the guys who... They were... Yeah, no, the two guys who they won the Nobel Prize for sequencing the whole of human DNA. And there were two of them, I forget their names. One of them is an atheist. The other is a devout Christian. That's it, Crick and Watson. Crick is a devout Christian, Watson is an atheist. Yeah? But what type? You'll find almost invariably ilahiyya. They are deists. Deists meaning like Aristotle. What God did is he kind of went, carry on. He was a prime mover. He gave the universe a shove, he big banged. He did the big bang. Then he said, right, you carry on now. And the universe kind of unfolded itself. Okay? Ibn Sina had a belief like that. You know, he believed in God, but his belief was that God basically kind of gave the first shove, and then everything unfolded. Ibn Sina actually uses the example of a clock. He said the clock, God wound the clock. Right? God wound the clock. It was as though, he says, as though God wound the clock. Everything was set in place. He created everything to work with everything else. He winds up the clock, he lets it go, and the clock ticks itself. God doesn't need to do anything now. The clock just ticks itself. Okay? And it's a very interesting theory, actually. Crick and Watson obeyed. Thank you very much. Yeah? We'll give the philosophers... We'll skip past philosophers for now, and we'll just go very quickly onto the authoritative Imam. Ta'aleem. Okay? So just remind me if I forget to come back to philosophy. Because this has a lot to do, we talk about maths and about, is it permissible to study physics and biology and all those types of questions, yeah? Okay. The Batiniya were basically the Ismaili Shia. And the Ismaili Shia, their doctrine was truth, as we've mentioned, is from God. Okay? That truth was passed to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ passed it to Sayyidina Ali. Ali passed it to Hussein. Hussein passed it to Zayn al-Abidin. Zayn al-Abidin passed it to Muhammad al-Baqir. Muhammad al-Baqir passed it to Ja'far al-Sadiq. And Ja'far al-Sadiq passed it to Ismail. Not to Musa Kazim, he passed it to Ismail. Okay? And from Ismail, the truth was passed on to an Imam. But the Imam was hidden. And a few people have access to the hidden Imam. Okay? And from them, you can get the truth. Okay, so there is an old man sitting in the mountain somewhere. You know, the Imam, he's sitting in a cave somewhere. Okay? And there are a few people that go into the cave and they ask the Imam questions, actual questions like, what time is Fajr? Those type of questions. Not like, where is God type. But, actual questions like, how... in which direction do we face for the Qibla? And the Imam tells them and they come out and then they pass the message on. Okay? And this is called ta'aleem. Ta'aleem means authoritative instruction. In this context, ta'aleem means teaching, but here it means authoritative instruction. How do you attain the truth? The truth can only be known through khabar sadiq. This is what they're saying. Khabar sadiq. A truthful report. That truthful report needs to reach back to one who knows the truth. The one who knows the ultimate truth is the Imam. Okay? Is the Imam. What's the context? We've spoken about the political and social context. The Ismaili Shia were a very strong power in the era of Ghazali, although they had been pushed back quite significantly by the time he was an adult. But you still had the Fatimids in Egypt. You had the Buyids in the southeast of the Muslim world. You had the Nizaris. The Nizaris, you know who the Nizaris are? The assassins. And the assassins were a subsect. They were called the Fedayun. The Fedayun. They call themselves Fedayun, those who sacrifice themselves. Okay? It's interesting that later on some of the Palestinians began to use the term Fedayun for suicide bombers. Actually naming yourself after people who were way off the beaten track. Yeah? Fascinating, really. Gosh. Okay, so one has to be careful about some of these words and where they come from. But we know about the assassins. The assassins assassinated people, basically. They were the prototypical suicide bombers. They assassinated Nizam al-Mulk, for example. One of the Fadayun, one of the assassins dressed up as a Sufi. Sufis wore very distinctive clothing. He dressed up as a Sufi. It was very well known that Nizam al-Mulk loved Sufis. He went into the presence of Nizam al-Mulk, embraced him, and stabbed him in the back, and then killed himself. That was the point. Then he killed himself. Yeah, and this was the approach. But we know about them from that perspective. However, they probably also assassinated the Sultan of Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk was the Vizier, Sultan was Fakhr al-Dawla, not Fakhr al-Dawla, before Fakhr al-Dawla. Anyway, who was it? Alp-Shah, no, they did not, in between. Malik Shah, that was it, Malik Shah. They assassinated Malik Shah as well, okay? So there were, these things were happening and they struck fear into people's hearts. However, the main issue was, not that, the main issue was their da'wah. The Nizaris were famous for their da'wah, okay? So they would go preaching the doctrine and they were very strong. Now Ghazali said, when I finished with philosophy, and I realized, and we've skipped ahead a bit, when I finished with philosophy, this whole ta'aleem business came to the fore. And I said, I'm going to start write about this, because Ghazali was not impressed by this at all. He was just really not impressed with the doctrine of ta'aleem. You'll see why in a second. But he said, I wanted to study it and then write something about it. At the same time, I got a summons from the Khalif, Al-Mustazhir Billah. And the Khalif said, write something that will refute the doctrine of the Ismailis. I said, okay, all right. So, he wrote his works. Interesting the reception that he got. He was criticized by one of the, he says, the defenders of tradition, the Sunnis. He said, why have you laid out their doctrine so clearly? You have stated their doctrine in stronger terms than they've stated their doctrine. You've made their lives easy. You're not a closet Shia, are you? And he said, Ghazali replied, in the Munqidh, he says, his debate, his point, he's got a point. He's got a point. It's exactly the same point that Ahmad bin Hanbal made to Harith al-Muhasibi. Now Harith was a great Sufi, but he was also a great theologian in the time of Ahmad bin Hanbal. And Ahmad bin Hanbal had a lot of time for him. But Harith al-Muhasibi was also a theologian. And what he did is he refuted the Mu'tazilis. He wrote works in refutation of the Mu'tazilis. When Ahmad bin Hanbal heard that Harith had written works in refutation of the Mu'tazilis, which is a heretical group, he went to him and he said, why have you written this work? And he said, well, I have to refute them. He says, yes. It's a religious obligation to refute them. Ahmad bin Hanbal says, but what are you going to do? Don't you present their argument before you present your refutation? He says, well, of course. He says, well, how do you know someone will only read their argument that's written in your book because you wrote it? They become convinced by the argument as stated in your book, not to be convinced by your refutation of it and become Mu'tazili. What is he saying? Ahmad bin Hanbal is saying, all publicity is good publicity. You're giving them publicity. Simply by talking about it, you're giving them publicity. If you just keep quiet, it'll all go away. And Ahmad bin Hanbal took this very seriously. Because Harith said, no, I need to do this. Ahmad bin Hanbal refused to meet him again until he died. And refused to allow his students to study with him. This is a serious thing, a major issue. Because Ahmad bin Hanbal was dead against it. And Ghazali said, he's got a point. He said, however, when a false doctrine has become widespread, such that everybody has heard about it, knows about it, there is no harm in stating the doctrine and then refuting it. The difference with Harith al-Muhasibi is that in the opinion of Ahmad bin Hanbal, not many people knew about Mu'tazilis. But because Harith had written a book, everyone, oh, Harith had written a book, they'll all go and read it and they'll all discover this doctrine that they didn't know about before. False doctrine. But you know, people are lazy. They read half a book, they put it down. How do you know they'll only read the half about what the Mu'tazilis say and say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I think I'll go to sleep now. And you wake up in the morning and you're a Mu'tazili. Right? So he says it's a fair point. Right? So the danger. But what did Ghazali say? Ghazali said this doctrine is out there, it's loud and it's proud. Okay? Not all publicity is good publicity. Really stinking publicity is bad publicity. And actually what is required here is an absolutely thorough refutation of Ismaili Shiism. That will stick. In order to show that I have the ability to refute Ismaili Shiism, the first thing I'm going to do is explain exactly what Ismaili Shiism is. That is to say, I'm going to show that I can synthesize their works before I evaluate it. And that's what he did. And he wrote, in the end, 5 works against the Ismaili Shia. 5 works against the Ismaili Shia. And he pretty much destroyed their argument. And he did it in the same way he normally does. He incorporated the strong points of their argument. He said, yeah, but that's part of Sunni Islam. I should see. Now, so, he said, look, what are the Ismaili Shias? They said, you need an authoritative teacher. He said, I agree. You do need an authoritative teacher. It's the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah, but he's dead. That's what they said. They said, he's dead. I.e., he is in the ghaib. He's unreachable. You can't go and ask the Prophet ﷺ. He says, the hidden Imam is also unreachable. So what's the difference? He said, no, he sent deputies. And so did the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ did the same thing. The Sahaba and the Tabi'een. So this is the deputies of the Prophet ﷺ. Oh, yeah, but then Ghazali said, look, okay, tell me something. How do you deal with new questions? So let's say you're in the disciple of the hidden Imam is in China. Okay? The hidden Imam is hidden, but let's assume he's in Egypt. Let's assume he's the Fatimid Khalif, which is kind of the assumption. He's the Fatimid Khalif. You're in China. Someone asks you, is it permissible to eat this particular type of meat? Yeah? Is it permissible to eat this particular type of meat? And what are you going to say? You're going to say, I haven't asked the Imam that question. So, what do you do now? Option one, go ask the Imam. Yes? Option 1, battery died, sorry. Option 1, go ask the Imam. By the time you get to the Imam and back again, that person's going to be dead. Right? Or you want to know if you need to go to the masjid. Imagine any fiqhi question. Okay? These types of things we were talking about. This guy, he divorces his wife with this means, and then he does that, then he does this, then he does that, the other, and then he comes back and, am I divorced or not? Yeah? You need to go ask the Imam. By the time you go ask the Imam and come back, that woman's iddah is going to be over. She's going to be married to someone else. So you can't go and ask the Imam. No telephones here. You can't go ask the Imam. So what do? You either don't answer the question, or you use ijtihad. You use similar rulings the Imam has given, and you base your answer on that ruling. Yes? He said, that's ijtihad. That's what we do. But they say, but what's the basis of your ijtihad? And how do you check its correctness? And he said, right, now we're talking about ijtihad. Now you accept that you can make ijtihad, that you have to make ijtihad sometimes. Let's talk about how you make ijtihad. And he says, our ijtihad is on the basis of what you accept and what we accept, which is the Quran. So the Quran sets forth certain rational modes of thinking. And what he does in the work he wrote called Al-Qistas Al-Mustaqim, the Just Balance, he elaborates the 5 major forms of syllogisms. There's the 5 forms of deductive reasoning, the 5 major forms of syllogism from the Quran itself. And he says, look, the Quran, it's clear in the Quran that Allah approves of logical deduction. That's the reason, the truth of reason, right? Rational data. Allah approves of it. Allah uses it himself as evidence, right? So the people of tradition will accept it because it's from the Quran. The people of logic will accept it because it's rational and nothing in it contradicts reason. The people of ta'aleem must accept it because it's from the Quran, which is an authoritative source of knowledge. And it's authoritatively getting information from an authoritative source of knowledge. What's the issue? What you do, we already do. There's no need for your doctrine. The only question now is, how truthful, how trustworthy is your Imam? And he said they have no answer to this. Because the argument of Ghazali is your Imam, whoever he is, wherever he is, more trustworthy than the Prophet ﷺ? No. The Prophet ﷺ is the Prophet. We've got the Prophet ﷺ. We've got the Quran that he brought. we've got his statements, we've got a rational means of determining the answer to questions that we cannot ask anymore from the Prophet ﷺ. What now is the issue? We are following an authoritative Imam in a logically coherent way. We are more ta'limi than you are. We are more ta'limi than he says. He says, look, these guys, he basically says, to use one of my paraphrases, these guys are kebabs. Basically, these guys are kebabs. He says it, we'll finish with this. There is no substance to their views and no force to their argument. Had it not been for the weak defense put forth by the ignorant friend of truth, that innovation, given its weakness, would never have attained its present position. Because what were the Sunnis saying? The Ismailis were saying, you need an authoritative Imam. The Sunnis were saying, no you don't. Huh? Why no? Well, because you say we do, so we don't. Yeah? What kind of argument is that? And Ghazali said, had it not been for these guys making silly arguments, actually silly arguments like this, this would never have gone anywhere. What is Ghazali? Ghazali is basically saying, we are ta'limis. And we are better ta'limis than you are, just like he said to the philosophers. We are philosophers. We're better philosophers than you are. Okay? So, but intense fanaticism led the defenders of truth to prolong the debate with them over the premises of their arguments and to contradict them in everything that they said. Thus they fought the ta'limis over their claim that there must be an authoritative teaching and an authoritative teacher. And also in their claim that not every teacher is suitable, but there must be an infallible teacher. Their argument showed the need of authoritative teaching, and the authoritative teacher was loud and clear. The counter-argument was weak. So the Shi'i argument, you must have an infallible teacher, is a strong argument. The counter-argument that the Sunnis were making was a weak argument. So what happens? Because of that, many were seduced into thinking that it was due to the strength of the ta'limi's doctrine, not the weakness, or literally the dim-wittedness of the defender of truth and his ignorance of how to go about refuting it. Yeah? So he said, and then he explains, where does he put it? We have tested thoroughly their doctrine and probed it inside and out. The substance of their doctrine comes down to deceiving the common folk and the dim-witted by showing the need for an authoritative teacher and to disputing men's denial of that need with strong and effective arguments. So that's the first premise. You need an authoritative teacher. This is our doctrine. You need an authoritative teacher. So of course the Sunnis are going to say, no you don't, no you don't, no you don't. Then I've set up nice straw man. Thank you very much. There's a nice cardboard cutout of Muhammad Ali, which I can punch to my heart's content now. And show how much better a boxer I am than Muhammad Ali. Because I can float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. And he's a cardboard cutout. Right? All you've done is they've set a trap for you. They've set a rhetorical trap for you. You've walked into the rhetorical trap. Rather than simply saying, I agree, you need an authoritative teacher. Someone came to me once and said, what is the problem you Muslims have with evolution? I said, no more than we have with gravity. What? I said, I have no more problem with belief in evolution than I have with belief in gravity. And I said, I believe in gravity. He says, now he's stuck. He doesn't know what to say now. He wasn't expecting that answer. Now, I didn't mean it in the way he meant it, but that's, it's one of the benefit of rhetoric, isn't it? Then I sat and explained what I meant. If you are saying that evolution is a description of a mechanism through which species differentiate, okay. Gravity is a description of a mechanism by which particles that have mass are attracted to each other, okay. That's fine. Gravity is based on a constant. That constant is fixed. No one knows why that constant is fixed. The constant is fixed by God, so that you can understand the nature of the world around you. Why is it that if viruses or retroviruses write themselves into the DNA of a host organism and bring about a change in that system and so forth, and so the organism becomes more adaptable to a certain environment? Okay. You're describing a mechanism. I have no problem with you describing a mechanism. I'm not a biologist. You're the biologist. You're describing a mechanism. Fine. Right? Gravity, describing a mechanism. That's fine. You're the physicist, not me. That's fine. Do I impute ultimate causality to evolutionary mechanisms? Do I impute ultimate causality to gravity? No. No. Because if you bring a plan, and this is the difference in Aristotle, this is actually Aristotelian. Material cause, formal cause, efficient cause, and ultimate cause. Right? What's a formal cause? A theory. A theory is a formal cause. It's a description of a mechanism by which something occurs. If I bring you the plans of a jet engine, will the plans bring about the jet engine? No, of course not. The plan is not going to bring about the jet engine. Someone working to the plan can bring about a jet engine. But the plan itself is not a jet engine. You've got a theory, but the point here is not evolution or gravity or anything. The point here is, how do you debate with someone? Okay? And the ta'aleem is, we're turning around to the Sunnis and saying, you need an authoritative teacher, don't you? Because that's our belief. And you're going to say, well, if that's your belief, then we disagree. Why are you disagreeing? Okay? So this is what he says. He says, there's no substance to this thing. Yeah? And so it goes until someone tries to help them about the need for the authoritative teacher by saying, can you teach us something? Can you teach me something that the hidden Imam taught you personally? Tell me some secret the hidden Imam taught you personally. Then their response is, no, you come to the hidden Imam. Yeah? He says, look. Yeah, he said, oh no, you know, you've conceded to me this much, so you believe that there's an Imam, go and find him yourself. Go find him yourself. This, you know, he knows that were he to add any more, he would be put to shame and be unable to solve even the simplest problem. This is the true nature of their situation. Try them, you will hate them. Right? Try it once, you'll know. It's nonsense, basically. It's nonsense. This is when we had this experience of them, washed our hands of them. So they're talking nonsense, basically. And that was he's very cutting in his dismissal. Philosophy, he gives it a lot more credit. Ta'aleem, he just says this is just nonsense. Yeah, it's sophistry. Ta'aleemism is basically sophistry. It's basically people who are good at arguing. The fact that people who are good at arguing can make weak arguments look strong, especially when they put up against people who are rubbish at arguing. Okay, but you put them against someone who is capable of arguing, they don't stand a chance. So that was that. We'll, inshallah, next week we'll talk about philosophy and we'll look at Ghazali's approach to tasawwuf. We'll learn about his spiritual crisis and we'll go from there. Jazakumullah khair. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Bi rahmatihi ya arhamar rahimin. I mean, one thing I want you to take from this again is the approach. The approach is the key thing here. How he approaches something. And it comes from the fact that he was already an imam in fiqh, an imam in theology. We need to be careful here. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to read every book written by every atheist and I'm going to refute it. Do you know the first thing about how to make an argument? Do you know the first thing about logic yet? Have you applied logic? Simple test for you. If you want to do something like this, test number 1, entry level test. Okay? Take an article from a newspaper. Take it like a comment piece or an opinion piece from a broadsheet newspaper like the Times or the Independent or the Telegraph, something like that, okay? And just write down what the actual argument is. Just that. Don't critique it. See if you can simply write down in 10 lines the argument that they are making. If you can't do that, you don't stand a chance of refuting it. And that's just an article about whether we should, whether there should be a mansion tax or not. Forget about religion. With anything, what you will find, and maybe we should devote a little bit of time to something that Shaykh Hamza did. This was very useful, actually. He did a series called How to Read a Book, which was really good. It's based on a book which is called How to Read a Book. Yeah, and he talks about the levels of reading and the fact that we don't read analytically. We just read for information. So again, on those levels, yeah, what is our reading level? Our reading level is here, at best. Our reading level, sorry, you can't see it. Our reading level is comprehension. Okay? We don't apply, we don't analyze, and we certainly are in no position to be synthesizing and evaluating. Okay? Learn your religion well first. Learn, you'll study critical thinking, learn that well. Do things in class. I mean, in this class, we talk a lot about these types. We have a lot of back and forth. Yeah? And what you're doing and what the fuqaha did, what Ghazali do, is strengthen his rational, his reasoning capacity. It's not about learning more and more fiqh. It's about strengthening your reasoning capacity. Okay? May Allah make it easy for us, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin.